All right, welcome to Hoops Tonight here at The Volume. Happy Friday, everybody. Hope all of you guys have had a great week so far. Got a jam-packed show for you today. It's Mailbag Day. We're going to be bouncing all around the league with questions that you guys dropped in the comments. I sincerely appreciate you guys for dropping the questions. Don't forget, if you want to leave a question in the mailbag, you drop them in the YouTube comments. I take them from the Friday and then the Monday through Thursday leading into the Friday show. So if you want to get a mailbag question into next Friday's show, today or Monday through Thursday next week, make sure you drop those questions in the comments. You guys know the drill. Before we get started, subscribe to the Hoops Tonight YouTube channel so you don't miss any more of our videos. Follow me on Twitter at @JasonLT so you guys don't miss show announcements. Don't forget about our podcast feed, wherever you get your podcasts under Hoops Tonight. It's also super helpful if you leave a rating and a review on that front. We have brand new social media pages on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook for the Hoops Tonight channel where we're releasing more content. Make sure you guys follow us there. And then as I mentioned at the start, keep dropping mailbag questions in those YouTube comments so that we can hit them on Fridays. All right, let's talk some basketball. First question. Hey, Jason, love your videos. With the Warriors' need for a second option and having $30+ million in expiring salary, what do you think about a Brandon Ingram or Anthony Davis fit with the Warriors? Are they realistically gettable? Who would you also consider? So Brandon Ingram is an interesting fit in a lot of ways on both sides of the spectrum. Like, he is a bit of a ball stopper. Like, Brandon Ingram is at his best when he can play a more heliocentric style. He's one of the better passing forwards in the league, and he's really good with cross-court passes. He's got long arms. He can get that, just whip that thing across the court into the shooting pocket when a low man steps over and a ball screen. He can really be methodical when he's picking you apart in spread pick and rolls. He likes to run a lot of ISOs around the elbow. He'll come off of off-ball action and look to score around the elbow when he's got a defender trailing him in those actions. Technically, not a great fit within the Warriors offense, which is very much quick decisions, read and react, and everyone's involved. The ball's flowing from side to side. So that would be somewhat of a concern, right? But there's more complications than that. For instance, he's shooting a lot more threes this year. He's taking 7 per game and making 37% of them. He was below 4 attempts per game in each of the previous 2 seasons. He's converting spot-up possessions at 1.43 points per possession. So he is doing a better job of quickly catching and attacking in those spot-up situations. Also, there's something to be said about having variety in your offense. That's potential upside, right? And here's the thing. Anytime you make a star trade, there's risk. So for the record, before you ever even consider this process or even venture into this in terms of changing your kind of mental approach to this team towards tweaking the roster in the future, anytime you make a trade, there's a risk. So if you want to pretend like this can't go wrong, I don't know what to tell you. Every trade has risk. Maybe the fit is super clunky and the team underachieves. That's a potential outcome. Maybe you trade Jonathan Kuminga in a deal like this and he goes somewhere else and he ends up being a superstar. Now, I don't think that's likely. Jonathan Kuminga had a big game last night in the win against the Rockets, right? But I don't think he has superstar upside. I think he has star upside. I don't think he has superstar upside. If you told me Jonathan Kuminga was the 20th best player in the league in 5 years, I'd believe that. Do I think he's going to be the 7th best player in the league in 5 years? No, I don't think that he has them in there, that in his game, right? But there's obviously a risk when you make that type of deal, right? Look at the Clippers. You trade for Paul George. Suddenly you're the championship favorite in Vegas. Shea is a 20-year-old rookie who just averaged 11 points per game. Now, to be clear, when Shea was Jonathan Kuminga's age, right now, Shea was much, much, much better. He was like a 24-point per game, 50-40 guy. He was just at a much higher level than Jonathan Kuminga is at right now. But yeah, you make that trade and Shea goes off and becomes a top-tier superstar. I think he's the 4th best player in the world. And the Clippers underachieve. And so the gamble doesn't pay off. That's part of the risk, right? But then there's also versions of that risk where things kind of click into place and it ends up dramatically improving your team. And who cares what happens with the other guys? You accomplish the goals that you want to accomplish. That's the game. That's the game of making tweaks to the roster, right? And there is upside with a guy like Brandon Ingram. Even though Brandon plays different, playing different doesn't necessarily mean bad. There are advantages to playing different ways in different parts of the game or being able to tweak your play style based on who you're playing against. Even the old Warriors teams, if you guys remember, when Sean Livingston and Leandro Barbosa would come into the game, they played very different than the Steph Curry lineups. Talent is talent at the end of the day. And again, you look at those late game situations, imagine the final couple possessions in the Denver Nuggets game. And all of a sudden you have Steph getting denied off ball. And all of a sudden the ball's in Andrew Wiggins or Jonathan Kuminga's hands. If that's Brandon Ingram, he's got a better chance of getting a bucket there because that's what he does for a living. And it improves your chances of thriving in those types of situations. So like there's upside as well. And that's why it's like anytime you want to make yourself better or improve your situation, you typically have to take a risk. And that risk comes with the possibility of reward or the possibility of it not working out in your favor. That's the name of the game. Now, Anthony Davis, like you mentioned in your question, I just think that's too unrealistic. I don't think the Lakers would trade Anthony Davis unless they got an absolute haul of draft compensation and young players back. And I just think that would drain the Warriors' resources too much. And then also Anthony Davis and Draymond Green are somewhat redundant. And so I don't think that makes a ton of sense. As a basketball fan, I would love to see LeBron play with the Warriors. I just think him and Steph are such a natural fit, and I think it would instantly vault them into top-tier championship contention, but it would just be way too difficult to pull it off. Like, you'd have to convince LeBron to leave his family, and I just don't think he'd ever do that. And then LeBron's salary is huge and tough to match, so you'd have to include someone like Wiggins or Draymond, which includes a lot of risk and potential downside there. It'd be difficult to pull off, so it's never going to happen. But obviously, as a basketball fan, I think it'd be fun to watch LeBron and Steph try to make a playoff run together. But like the actual options are somewhat limited, right? It's guys like Brandon Ingram, guys like Jeremy Grant, guys like Zach LaVine that are on the table, and all of them come with risk. You just have to decide if you want to risk something to try to win a championship. And that's a tough decision to make. And I understand the complication, and that's why I always talk about like waiting till the deadline. You're just going to have more information than you have now. You'll have roughly twice as much information when you get to that point, which will give you a better opportunity to make an informed decision at that point. Is Tyrese Haliburton even a top 10 point guard right now? He's just been so inconsistent / bad this season. Here are guys ahead of him right now in no particular order. Steph, Shea, Luka, Kyrie, Dame, Jalen Brunson, De'Aaron Fox, LaMelo Ball, John Morant, and James Harden. I think I didn't agree with all those guys except for LaMelo. The stuff with LaMelo is a little complicated because like he is playing really heliocentric, really high usage, and even though he's putting up big box score numbers, the team isn't really scoring particularly well. By the way, this is before his injury, but like the LaMelo stuff is a little bit like fool's gold, good stats on a bad team kind of thing. But all those other guys are definitely playing better than Tyrese Haliburton. The Tyrese Haliburton thing is one of the strangest things that I can remember seeing in my time covering the league. With the way he was playing this time last year, he legitimately looked like the next great superstar in the league. He looked like evolutionary Steve Nash. The Bucks couldn't guard him. The Celtics couldn't guard him. Like it was just a problem for everybody. And then he hurt his hamstring and he's never been able to get that athletic burst back. And what's scary about that is we've seen a couple examples of this where it's like James Harden hurts his hamstring and he's never really been the same. Remember how good Devin Booker was in the NBA Finals run in 2021? And since then, he's been able to have some bursts, but he's had some soft tissue injuries that have kind of recurred over the last few years. And he's been somewhat inconsistent in being able to reach the level of play that we envision for a Devin Booker, right? And so like there are some examples of this where guys like James Harden, Tyrese Haliburton, Devin Booker, where like the hamstring injury seems to kind of limit their mobility a little bit, and then they fail to reach the ceiling they were originally at. So I'm hoping that's not what it is, but it's just there's some weird stuff too with the burst where like at home he seems to be like a lot more explosive. The home road splits for him are like crazy out of control. So I don't really know what to make of it. I think I mostly agree with your list that, like I said, outside of LaMelo, I'm always hesitant to write guys off completely. LeBron said something in his post-game presser after the Heat game that I thought was interesting. He said, he's like, I know how quickly things can turn in this league. And it's the truth. Like, reputation has such a lingering kind of effect on discourse surrounding players. It's like, if a guy goes and plays bad for 2 weeks, it completely changes your impression of that player, right? Like, as a Laker fan, I can think of like 2023, Rui has an awesome playoff run. And coming out of that, everyone's like, man, LeBron, AD, Austin, Rui, what a core. That's a squad. Let's see if we can't anchor those guys with a few other good players and see if you can't make a run, right? And then Rui's just flat out bad in the Denver series the next year. And now it's like, oh, Rui's unserious. He can't do this. Then like Rui comes out to start the season and he's pretty good this year. But then as of late, he's been really bad. And it's like all of a sudden, like your opinion of these guys just like wildly oscillates back and forth based on how they're playing. And that's the thing. Like all it takes is him getting healthier, getting his legs underneath him, regaining his confidence, mojo, rhythm, and going on a run for 2 weeks where he looks like the old Tyrese Haliburton. And all of a sudden, most people won't even care about the stretches where he looked bad. And so like it's kind of just a weird thing. And there's a lot of like other stuff going on with Indiana too, in terms of like rotation decisions, some of the stuff with like the fit with Ben Mathurin. Like they have a funk of their own that they're dealing with. But like I will say that what I saw happen with Tyrese Haliburton over the course of the last year is definitely one of the strangest things that I've seen in my time covering the league. Hey Jason, mailbag. What do you think is going on with Jamal Murray? Is it laziness or insatisfaction with one ring? I've heard via Denver beat writers that Murray never comes into seasons in shape and doesn't rehab as hard as he could for injuries. Is it coincidence? Either way, for Denver to do anything this year, Murray needs to wake up, and he just got a damn max contract to put a ton of pressure on the Nuggets front office in order to do so. So frustrating as a Nuggets fan. So, I've always thought it's interesting how this kind of thing can snowball. And another example of this kind of thing is with Joel Embiid, where it's like everyone focuses on the injuries. And like, I'm not going to sit here and pretend like injuries don't have a certain luck element to them and that there's some of that that's outside of your control. But on a basic level, let's talk through it. If you, as a professional athlete, take the level of seriousness necessary with your diet and your exercise regimen to be in shape, which should be like, in theory, the baseline of being a professional athlete, right? Then you limit your chances of sustaining an injury. If you limit your chances of sustaining an injury, you have longer, more consistent stretches of being healthy, which continue to help you be in better shape, which continue to perpetuate your health and your ability to avoid those injuries. The exact opposite happens when you're not in shape. So like if Jamal Murray or Joel Embiid comes into the season out of shape and he shows up to training camp, and I know there's just not a ton of you guys that listen to the show that played in college, but I know there's some of you guys that played in college or played in high school. Do you guys remember what it was like as a college basketball player showing up to campus in August, September, and the type of like heavy duty conditioning and how they kick your ass on the court every day? Do you remember in high school in early November when you'd have your tryouts? And then that first like 2 weeks in November, like how much you have to run, how much conditioning there is, how many defensive drills you do. Those are hard on your body. And like, if you go into that situation out of shape, yeah, you're playing your way into shape through that training camp or that early part of the season where you're starting up the engine, starting up that process. But that's also where you can sustain injuries if you're not in shape. And so if you come into season out of shape and then you suffer a nagging injury in training camp, in large part because you're out of shape, and that forces you to miss time, which makes it so that when you're trying to fight your way back onto the court, you're also out of shape. And then you get back onto the court and you're still not in the condition that you need to be and you suffer another little nagging injury. It can just kind of drag on throughout the season. Luka Doncic is another guy that's kind of a victim of this type of approach. You dramatically improve your luck on the injury front just by taking care of your body before you go into these processes. If you can spend the month of August and September before NBA training camp, not necessarily playing with a lot of impact or killing your body, but at least hyper-focusing on your diet and making sure you're at the right weight and have a good baseline for cardio and all that kind of stuff going into training camp, you just have a better chance of surviving that process without suffering nagging injuries. So they are all related. And you're right. Like I've heard the same things about Jamal Murray in the way he approaches his rehab and what the type of condition he comes into training camp in. And I absolutely believe those things are connected. And so what's going to turn things around for Jamal Murray? Getting in shape and staying in shape and not letting himself get out of shape. That will help him do better on the injury front. If he can go an extended stretch of not being injured, he'll feel his base getting stronger and he'll get in a better rhythm on the court, because that's the other part of it. If you're constantly banged up and in and out of the lineup and not feeling 100% physically, it's hard for you to get into a rhythm. I watched Jamal Murray hit a couple of jump shots in a game last week, can't remember which one, where he's just like not getting a ton of lift. And he's like making the shot, but it's like all wrist at the top of the shot because he's just not getting the lift that he needs. Like Jamal Murray that we've seen in the playoffs in the past gets separation. He's an athlete. He'll dunk on you. And he's just not in that condition as often as he needs to be. And there's some criticism that he deserves as a result of that. And you're right, there is pressure. Nikola Jokic is the best player in the world. This roster has enough talent to be good. They need Jamal Murray to be better. And so it starts with him. It starts with him and his approach and making sure that he holds up his end of the bargain as a professional athlete. Why don't the Nuggets play Jokic with more bench players as he can elevate everyone and instead try to give that unit to Jamal and maybe Michael Porter Jr.? I thought about this after looking at a post that said Jokic was the superstar that plays with the starters the most, and this leads to the bench being extremely terrible. I would be interested to see if you can pull up data that backs the notion of Jokic playing with the starters more compared to superstars like Giannis, Luka, Ant, Tatum, etc. So here's the thing. You inevitably have to play your superstar with bench groups. Like it's not just like starters, bench. That only happens if you can do like straight up line shifts, and that's extremely rare around the NBA. And typically you need to have really, really talented lineups, like some of the stuff we've seen with the Warriors, where like their 6th through 11th best players are as good as the 3rd through 10th best players on or 3rd through 9th best players on some other teams, right? Like they have a depth of talent. The top end on the Warriors is limited, but they have a depth of talent, right? So they can get away with that sort of thing. For the vast majority of teams, there's your two primary offensive engines, right? So let's take for the Nuggets, let's call it Jamal Murray and Nikola Jokic. There's going to be a bench unit that is led by Jamal Murray, and there's going to be a bench unit that's led by Nikola Jokic. If you imagine they start the game together, one of them goes to the bench, and this guy's got to carry a lineup, and then they swap, and then that guy's got to carry a lineup, and then they come back on the floor together and they close the half, right? Like it's more complicated than that, but that's the gist of it, right? And so inevitably, Jokic is going to be playing with bench groups. Now, what I believe you're referencing is like pairing more of the starters when Jokic is off the floor. And there is some upside to that potentially, but the Nuggets have done that over the years. Generally speaking, when it's like playoff time, it's a lot of like Aaron Gordon's out there with Jamal Murray, and Aaron Gordon's out there with Christian Brown, and they're switching and they're trying to get stops, and they're counting on Aaron Gordon and Jamal Murray to make something out of nothing. The problem is that like it's really difficult to do that over the course of the regular season, because then you're going to put a lot of minutes on your starters, which can wear them down in the big picture. And so like I understand when coaches try to make it work with deep bench lineups, because every time you have a non-damaging stretch with a deep bench lineup, you give yourself rest for your starters and you dramatically improve your ability to compete over the extent of the season. There's also this thing that you run into a lot where coaches don't want to have to lean on that sort of thing, because then you kind of pigeonhole yourself into that for the rest of the season. So for instance, like some lineups are bad, but if you give them time, they'll become better. And so you have to be willing to put up with some suck along the way, right? And so a lot of times, like you'll see a group out there and it'll be like, man, like why don't they stagger this guy in there? Why don't they put that guy in there? And it's like, maybe Coach Malone will do that if he needs to, but he wants to not do that if he can. Because if he doesn't do that, he gives that lineup more reps, more opportunity for Julian Strawther to try to create offense, right? More opportunity to let Russell Westbrook work with these bench guys and see what he can put together. And then hopefully in the long run, that lineup just performs better, right? Like the on-off data with Jokic at the beginning of the year was like insane. The goal is to shrink that over the course of the year, not to just ask Jokic to solve all your problems. That's a lot to ask. And this isn't your last chance either. Jokic is in the heart of his prime. He's got multiple years left of being the best player in the league. There are big picture goals that you have to keep in mind as well. And so, yeah, like I think that that'll always be the way that Mike Malone confronts that problem in the big moments. It'll be a lot of the starters without Jokic when the time comes. But you need to be more cognizant of the big picture goals within the scope of the regular season. The Emirates NBA Cup is here, and you can win big getting in on the action at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Who will win this year? We'll find out soon, but there's sure to be rim-rattling slams and no-look passes that bring the crowd to their feet. Get behind your favorite players and the prop bets you can make on DraftKings, the home of NBA player props. Ready to place your first bet? Try betting on something simple like picking a team to win. Go to the DraftKings Sportsbook app and make your pick. The New York Knicks are currently the favorite to win the NBA Cup at plus 450. First time, here's something special just for you. New DraftKings customers can bet $5 to get $150 in bonus bets if your bet wins. Score big with DraftKings Sportsbook. Every point counts. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use code HOOPS. That's HOOPS. That's code HOOPS for new customers to get $150 in bonus bets if your bet wins when you bet just $5. Only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. Next question. When are you going to criticize JJ like you criticized Ham? This was an inevitable question that was going to come, and you're going to see a lot of this sort of thing being talked about on a lot of different networks and by a lot of different media personalities over the course of the next week or two. All of these things are more complicated than they look on the surface. So, for instance, forget about the coaches for a second, both JJ and Darvin. The reason why I'm frustrated with the Lakers in this 2-6 stretch is the extended multi-week, like over 2-week stretch where they're just not interested in fighting. Like, you desperately need a win for so many reasons. And you go into Miami, get kicked in the teeth, and don't in the first quarter, you just stop playing. Like, straight up stop playing. The starters, before the first TV timeout, stopped playing. Like, that is an issue. Right? So that's one issue. The fight of the team. The basketball character of the team. That's what I was focused on in yesterday's video. The reason why is very simple, because the 82 games is your practice for the April, May, June reality of going after the trophy. That is your opportunity to prepare to be a championship team. And if you skip that process, you will not be a champion. End of story. And I thought last year under Darvin Ham that funk that they were in December had a lot more to do with them just being frustrated with Darvin Ham. I was wrong. It's their basketball character, as has been clearly displayed by them quitting on JJ Redick in early December. Like, come on. You know? So that's why I'm off the Lakers. It's a basketball character thing. But that's not the only reason the Lakers are struggling. Austin Reeves was out the last 2 games. He's their third best player. He's also like one of the only guys on that team that have natural motor, like that naturally play hard every game, are Austin Reeves, who's injured, Jared Vanderbilt, who's injured, and then like maybe Gabe Vincent, maybe Jackson Hayes, who's injured, and maybe a guy like Max Christie. But like D'Lo's not a natural motor guy. Rui's not a natural motor guy. LeBron's not a natural motor guy at this phase of his career. LeBron has a great motor when the stakes are down. Like, that's the thing, is like LeBron is the most dependable big game player that I can remember ever watching. Like, if it's an important game, LeBron's going to be there and he's going to give you his best. It's like a guarantee. But like in the regular season, he's not a motor guy. Anthony Davis is not a motor guy. What's motor? Motor is just like your habit, your natural ability to just play hard regardless of what the circumstances are. Right? And so like there's more complicated things going on. Austin's hurt. That sucks. Jared Vanderbilt's hurt. That sucks. They're bigs. The 2 bench bigs that they have on the roster that aren't two-way guys are Christian Wood and Jackson Hayes, and they're both hurt. So there are other factors at play. Anthony Davis is dealing with plantar fascia issues in his foot. That could have something to do with why he's not necessarily fighting as hard as he usually does. LeBron's in a big funk. So like there's other factors at play, obviously. Everything is a hell of a lot more complicated than what's just on the surface. So let's go back to last year. And I said this at the time. Is Darvin Ham 100% responsible for what happened with the Lakers? No. I have been abundantly clear about the issues with the Lakers roster as it pertains to their athleticism and their motor. I've said that for years now. That doesn't change the fact that Darvin was also a bad coach. Guys, Darvin was a bad coach. It was the worst kept secret in the league. It was consensus around the league. People I talked to that don't even cover the Lakers that were just watching from afar were like, he doesn't know what he's doing. The players have repeatedly passive-aggressively thrown Darvin under the bus for not knowing what he's doing. There were many obvious things for the fans on the outside. A complete lack of urgency. Anytime anything bad happened, it was hands in the pockets. It was a presser. Oh, it's a marathon, not a sprint. And it's like, okay, you're not holding them accountable on a daily basis, though. He was not an active coach. He was not on the sideline actively coaching the game. He would just basically stand there and watch. And then when they'd come back to the huddle, he'd throw some platitude, some meaningless platitude to them in the huddle, and then they'd go back out there. He was not a schematically smart coach. That was a bad basketball coach. Darvin Ham, I will be shocked if Darvin Ham gets another head coaching job in the NBA. I'll be floored if he gets another head coaching job in the NBA. Darvin Ham was a bad coach. That is separate from other issues that the Lakers have. JJ Redick has been coaching the team for a month and a half. And from what I can see with him, he's been much more engaged on a daily basis. He's added a lot more. They run more off-ball action, little things. Darvin Ham did not have them running exit screens and ball screens, where you're doing stuff with the off-ball defenders to keep off-ball defenders occupied while you're running your action. Up until recently, the Lakers were running a much higher percentage of organized offense per game than they were running under Darvin Ham. There were a lot of clear things that JJ was doing better and rectifying. The players were openly talking about the game plans and the attention to detail. So here's the thing. Do I know that JJ's a good coach yet? No, it's too early. He's only been doing it for a month and a half. I watched Darvin Ham for 2 years. He's a bad coach. So again, I understand on the surface that it looks bad, that the players quit on Darvin gets fired. Now the players quit on JJ, and it looks like it's unfair to Darvin. I get that. I'm saying that they have some quit in them. And that's separate from the fact that Darvin Ham is a bad coach. And so let's not get those two things conflated. Here's the one troll I'm going to respond to today, and then I promise I'll stop. Can you actually start covering other teams now? The coverage of this channel is 50 to 60% Lakers, and then good teams only get a couple of minutes. Also, Lakers fans need to apologize to everyone they just quickly labeled Lakers hater for seeing this reality 2 seasons ago. First of all, no one's going to apologize to you because 2 seasons ago, the Lakers were in the Western Conference Finals, so you were being a Lakers hater. And then secondly, this is one of my biggest pet peeves. I do talk about the Lakers a lot. Why they're my favorite team, and I watch a lot of their games. I want to talk about them. They also have a very large fan base. So it monetarily makes sense for us to cover the Lakers. That said, the idea that 50 to 60% of this channel is Lakers coverage is just a flat out lie. This week has been especially heavy in Lakers coverage because there's been a lot going on with LeBron being bad, which we covered on Tuesday, and then the complete meltdown in Miami, which we covered on Thursday. So we did, in the first 4 days this week, we did about 45 minutes of Lakers content. You're right, that's a lot. We did 3 hours of shows. We did 3 hours of shows over those 4 days. So we spent 2 hours and 15 minutes covering the rest of the league, which is a lot. So in a week where we were very heavy in Lakers, we were 30% Lakers. And the next week it'll be substantially lower, just like the previous week it was substantially lower. We spend 4 to 5 hours a week covering the NBA, and that means 3 to 4 hours a week covering a lot of other teams beyond the Lakers, the Warriors, the Celtics, the teams that we regularly hit. I spent 20 minutes talking about the Atlanta Hawks yesterday. So it's just one of those things where it's what you will maybe think when you look at the channel because of the way our thumbnails are, you're going to see a lot of Steph Curry. You're going to see a lot of LeBron James. You're going to see a lot of Lakers. You're going to see a lot of these big brands, right? Because that's just smart for marketing for us to get as much exposure for the channel as possible. Every one of those episodes has me covering the rest of the league. I work extremely hard to cover the rest of the league. And it's just complete bullshit that people look at the channel and they think it's just a Lakers channel. It just could not be further from the truth. And it could not be further from reality. All right, no more trolls. We're moving on. Next question. There's been a lot of conversation about the decline in ratings. And historically, the NBA has always changed/implemented rules to keep the game entertaining. So my question is, what rule would you change/add to increase the entertainment value of the NBA? Thanks. Love the show. So there's been a lot of talk about the 3-point shooting. I'm I'm less worried about that because I don't think it's something that needs to be countered by the rules. I think it's something that'll be countered by defensive evolvement. So or evolution, I should say. So the two most valuable shots are uncontested rim attempts and uncontested three-point shots, right? So analytically, it makes sense to guard the three-point line well. Teams will continue to emphasize guarding the three-point line, and within the next 5 years, defenses will get really good at guarding the three-point line, and that will add variety to basketball that has been lacking over the course of the last couple of years. So I'm not really worried about that one on a rule level. Everything for me in terms of opportunity for the game to be improved right now stems around the flow of the game as a television product, which stems around officiating. I don't like complaining about officiating on a team-by-team basis. I don't like complaining about officiating on a game-by-game basis. I think it's a loser mentality. We've gone into that a lot on this show. However, in the big picture of the NBA, there's still way too much of Trae Young came around this ball screen and a dude's side to side with him and Trae just kind of bumps into him and throws some bullshit up and gets sent to the foul line. Now this entertaining up and down basketball game between the Bucks and the Hawks is now turning into a free throw contest. You don't want that as a fan of the game. You don't want to watch teams parade to the free throw line. As a Laker fan, I have watched Laker games before where I'm like, okay, AD just fell over for the third time and Austin Reeves just flopped in the mid-range for the second time and the Lakers are shooting their 10th free throw of the quarter. Yeah, the team is doing well as a result, but this isn't fun to watch, right? I get that. And so I am of the belief that the NBA officiating side of things needs to focus on the flow of the game and the spirit of these rules more than the technicality of these rules. The more we focus on the technicality, the more gamesmanship we'll see, the more choppy stop and go play we'll see because of guys parading to the line, the more subjectivity that we bring in, the more trying to implement the spirit of the rule, the more flow that we'll get to the game and the better the television product will be. So that's the main thing that I think needs to be addressed over the course of the next couple years in terms of a rule change. Hey, Jason, I think the thing that is making the Hawks' new lineup so good is that they now have DeAndre Hunter and Bogdan Bogdanovic now cooking other teams' bench units, giving Atlanta extra offense from their bench, which is pretty reliable to count on. What do you think? I talked about this yesterday, too. I even like the idea of being able to bring in Bogdan to play with the starters, minus one of the guys, usually someone like Zachary Rissache, who I think is the worst of the three wings at this point, just because he's younger and he still has a lot of development to do. Although Zachary's really exciting. He's got some pretty explosive closeout attacking chops, and I kind of see him as being a guy that could become a more of a kind of similar to what Mikal Bridges did for the Suns in the 2020, 2021 area, where it's capitalizing on skip passes and making high-level attacking moves in the mid-range, in the short range, that is another ceiling-raising scoring piece that he does. They're going to have a lot of upside there in the long run. But it's like Norman Powell with the Clippers, right? They have their main lineups that they're going to go with. That's going to have James Harden, 3 athletes, and Ivica Zubac, right? But then they also have, we can bring Norman Powell into this mix, and now we have more firepower on the floor, and we can score with teams, right? Don't overestimate or underestimate Norman Powell's contributions to the Clippers' success, right? Bogdanovic is what that role is for this Hawks team. He's the guy that brings a different type of more aggressive scoring to complement Trae Young's playmaking, and you have versions of it where you can keep the two of them together, or you have versions of it where you can lean into defense and one of the guys. Another team like this is the Sacramento Kings before DeMar DeRozan entered the equation, where it's okay, this is a game where we can play Malik Monk and De'Aaron Fox together a lot. This is a game where we need to play De'Aaron Fox and another athletic defender instead, right? That's the type of flexibility that comes from having those different looks and from having a really high-powered offensive player on the bench. In the event that the Lakers could ever make a trade where they keep D'Angelo Russell, that's the way I would look at that too. Oh, this is a matchup where D'Angelo Russell can close and he can be out there and his offensive ability is an upside. Or, oh no, this is a game where D'Angelo Russell needs to sit and we need to have this better athlete on the floor because we need more support athletically on the perimeter. And that's kind of that approach. But again, I agree that is a vitally important part to being a productive basketball team, is having multiple guys that can take over the offense for extended stretches of the game. Jason, I know you're a Lakers fan, but I'm a Heat fan, and I'm curious to know your thoughts on our season. A lot of the specific Heat analysts who I follow all believe that the window is closed. Jimmy's decline due to age and Bam's offensive struggles have been a big cause for concern. If the Heat stay at this play-in level that they've been at for the past 3 years, what would you have them do this trade deadline / offseason? Everyone talks about trading Jimmy, but is a contract as big as his, granted it's expiring, for a clearly declining player even valuable? Would love to know your thoughts on the decision-making for the Heat front office. Keep up the great content. Huge fan from Hong Kong. Thank you so much for supporting the show. It means a lot to me. The offensive struggles have been really bizarre. Jimmy Butler in the first part of the year was having some really weird games where he was like not even looking to score. Then he came back from his injury and he's been gunning and he's been a lot better. And he's like over 60% from the field and over 60% from three on over 22 points per game since he came back. Like Jimmy's hooping, right? Bam, ever since the Nuggets series, I was like, why can't this dude make anything around the rim that isn't a dunk? And like how many times he got like little 5-foot push shots or easy kind of layup finishes around the rim that he'd smoke in it, how it hurt their chances in that Denver Nuggets series. And that just has never ceased to be a problem. That's extended into this year where he's just been like flat out atrocious finishing around the rim on anything that's not a dunk. And then there's also been like Bam's going to take more jump shots thing, which has caused him to be less active in the middle of the floor and a little bit more spotting up, which is kind of getting him out of his original involvement in the offense in some ways. And so it's just been kind of funky. But at the same time, like you got to seriously ask yourself, like, was this team ever a championship team even when Jimmy and Bam were really good? And the answer is no. Like going back to 2022 and 2023 when there were better versions of Jimmy and Bam was, Bam, they were still feisty, able to eliminate limited teams. I used to call them the bouncer at the championship club because it was like if you were not a real contender and you ran into Miami, you'd lose. But inevitably, Miami would lose to the team that would win it all or that was closer to winning it all, that was more of a legitimate championship contender because they didn't have the firepower. And so, like, if there was an opportunity to anchor Jimmy and Bam, it was getting a guy like Dame last year or making a more aggressive deal even the year before to try to anchor those guys when they were at a higher level. At this point, though, Jimmy just kind of feels like a wild card and Bam seems like he's hit a ceiling in a lot of ways. And so like at that point, you have to look at your big picture, and your big picture option is like Bam's 27 years old. I do think he'll get a little bit better as time goes on. I do think he can shoot the ball a little bit better over the big picture, right? But Jimmy at this point is better served to bring in other asset return. Now, one of the things that's nice is Jimmy is currently rehabbing his trade value with the way that he's been playing. So you could argue that the best thing to do is to continue what you've done since Jimmy came back, which is play through him more and have him put up numbers and rehab his value. Then you move him in February to a team that's desperate and wants to contend and recoup some sort of asset return so that you can then try to rebuild around Bam. And maybe it's a Kel'el Ware Bam front court where you have shooting. Like Kel'el Ware's minutes have been really up and down, and I haven't been super high on him yet, but he's young and that takes a lot of time, right? But like at that point, you just kind of start to look around and you're like, okay, if Tyler Herro's not a real foundational piece for us, what can we get back for him, right? Like, what are the guys that we're trying to build around in the long term? Like Pelle Larsson, he seems like a foundational type of role player within the Heat system, right? Like Jaime Jaquez Jr., his role has been a little bit different this year, but he's a guy that you want to continue to kind of give an opportunity to see what he can become in the big picture, right? Nikola Jokic, I don't really know that there's much of a foundational type of player there, but like you start to give all those guys more opportunity and see what they're capable of, and you start to kind of reconfigure from there. But like, unless you think you can contend for a title with Jimmy at this point, it's kind of like anything else where it's like his best ability to help this team at this point is asset return. But like he needs to continue to rehab his value, and the best way to do that is continue to play around him in the big picture. I do think it'd be interesting to go in on a big look. I think it'd be really interesting to find a center that could play alongside Bam, because when you have a really big, deep, monstrous defensive front line, it's just such a high floor. It's like the Brook Lopez, Giannis Antetokounmpo thing. It's like anytime Brook and Giannis just like play really hard on defense, they're just in every game because the two of those guys are just so good together, right? And like when you have that type of size and physically imposing front line, it's just such a strong foundation to build on everything else, right? And then you start to take chances on high-level offensive players in the draft and try to see if you can't find a perimeter initiator that brings more juice to the table than a guy like Tyler Herro or Terry Rozier. Hi, Jason. The Pistons have largely regained respectability this season. I agree. And the Cade Ivy pairing has been a huge positive given the initial questions about their fit. However, the two common themes behind them losing games is inconsistent front court scoring and a lack of ball handling / initiation outside of Cade. Getting a backup point guard like Elfrid Payton should address the latter issue. But I do feel like in order to take the next step, Detroit needs to find a number one scoring wing, as I think Cade is best served as an overqualified second scoring option. Asar and Ron Holland don't project to fit that mold, and I understand Trajan's view that this year is very much an evaluation of the current roster. But if you were the GM, would you consider trying to acquire an established vet like a Randall or an Ingram in a trade to accelerate this process, or wait to get that player via the draft, understanding a scoring forward is arguably the most coveted player archetype at the moment? That's a good point. Like if you want to get in the race for a guy like Randall or Ingram, I don't think Randall will get traded, but maybe he will. We'll see. But whether even like Jeremy Grant or like a Zach LaVine, that kind of thing, like there is going to be some fights for some of those guys, and it could end up being expensive, and it could end up setting your team back. Here's the thing. Don't be in a rush. I think Jaden Ivey is a really natural complement to Cade. And the main reason why is he brings a different type of attack. Cade is a size, methodical, working out of the middle of the floor decision maker, meaning like getting into ball screens and putting his defender in jail and kind of just slowly operating in the middle of the floor till he sees an opportunity to score to make those kickout passes. He kind of has like a Luka light type of approach there. Jaden Ivey brings downhill burst. That is a great compliment. Jaden can score the basketball. He has 8 20-point games this year. He had 17 all year last year. His true shooting percentage jumps by about 2% every year. He's up to 56% true shooting now, which like for a young guard is really good. Like 60% is outstanding, and he's already starting to encroach on that on a year-by-year basis. So like my thing is like, yeah, you are eventually going to want a third offensive player in there somewhere that can create his own shot and can create shots for others. But racing to get there at the expense of asset return is silly. The idea here is like Asar Thompson, Ron Holland, these guys, they are going to be playing your support roles alongside these guys. So they need to develop as off-ball scorers. Now, do I think Asar Thompson could be a Michael Porter Jr.-esque off-ball scorer, a Mikal Bridges-esque off-ball scorer? No. Do I think Ron Holland can be that? No. And so that's the next approach. I don't necessarily think they need to look for a guy that can be a offensive engine the way that Ivy and Cade can be at stretches of the game. I think they need off-ball scoring. Essentially, just imagine a much better version of Tobias Harris. A guy that when you swing the ball to the weak side on that skip pass, he's either knocking down the three or he's getting chased off the line to where he can make a play. We've seen a lot of teams go this route. Like the number one overall draft pick this year, Zachary Rissache, is a perfect example of this. That is an off-ball scorer who can be a plus defensive player for them. That's off-ball scoring complements on-ball scoring so well. On-ball scoring with on-ball scoring can be clunky. So like that's where it's like, if you were going to make that sort of deal, I would be targeting someone like a Lauri Markkanen this summer. Where it's like, what if we put Lauri Markkanen, like if you were going to try to include young players, that's the type of player you want to go after. Someone that has a lot more good basketball in them, that's earlier in their prime, that very wonderfully complements your stars. That would be the type of player that I'd make that type of deal for. But again, unless you feel like you can do it without giving up too much, you're better off just being patient and doing it through the draft. Because again, it might be another 2 years, but Jaden Ivey feels like a guy to me that's going to average 26 points per game on 60% true shooting at some point. And if he does, you're in a much better position at that point. And Cade's going to keep improving. And you're going to be able to generate a lot of really high quality off-ball opportunities. You need guys who can be deadly in those particular types of situations. But I wouldn't trade for a Brandon Ingram. I wouldn't trade for an older, injury-prone type of guy there. I would be going for either a young player, someone along the lines of Lauri Markkanen, or I'd be looking for that type of player in the draft to try to anchor those guys as an off-ball scorer. Last question. Jason, I'm surprised to hear how this was from the Cavs Celtics video on Monday. Jason, I'm surprised to hear how much you liked the shots Tatum was getting when he was hunting Garland, particularly at the end of the game. As a Cavs fan, I was really happy when that was the Celtics' late game offensive process. What makes the Celtics so good is they just have more high-quality guys that can shoot or attack closeouts than most teams. Hunting Garland basically neutralized that advantage and made their success come down to a low, efficient shot that almost no team wants their players taking, contested mid-range shots. It's hard to watch a smaller player consistently put into one-on-one situations over and over, and Tatum will convert on some of those possessions playing that way as he did in this game, but I will take that 100% over ball movement and spraying threes. He just could not keep up with the math problem that presents. A couple things. It's more complicated than that. In order to get those spray and threes, Tatum needs to bring 2 to the ball. And his best way to bring 2 to the ball in that situation is to punish Garland one-on-one. And so, like, it's one of those things where, like, Cleveland's defensive approach in that situation was, we don't want Boston to get spray out easy catch and shoot threes. By the way, they still gave up a few. There was a play where Tatum attacked Garland with about 5 minutes left on the right wing, beat him off the dribble, brought in an extra defender, and made a kickout pass, and Al Horford had a wide open corner 3. But for the most part, Cleveland was trying to stay home and trying to force Tatum to score on Garland on an island. This is where we can get a little bit heavy to playing the results. So, for instance, Donovan Mitchell hit a pull-up 3, 2 of them, in clutch time. A step back over Merrill, and then not over Merrill, over Hauser, excuse me. And then he hit that crossover on Drew Holiday where he kind of got caught on the screen, and he hit that like pull-up 3 at the top of the key. Donovan Mitchell is shooting 37.5% on pull-up jump shots this year. So they both went in. But there's a 62.5% chance that he misses either of those shots. Based on the way Tatum was playing, those short-range jump shots felt like a high percentage shot to me, like a shot that he was going to hit 65% of the time. And so again, just because Jason Tatum missed an easy layup over Garland and Donovan Mitchell made a tough contested pull-up 3 doesn't mean that Cleveland got the better shot. That's the results. In a late game situation, anything can happen. You could be running really great process on both ends for both teams, but maybe this guy sinks a prayer at the end of the shot clock and this guy smokes a layup, and that's the difference in the game. And I'm not saying that Cleveland made a prayer at the end of the shot clock. I'm talking about an imaginary situation, but you get the point. Like, at the end of the day, you can have better process than your opponent, and they might just make shots. So, like, you can't really over-index on the result and pay more attention to the process. The reality is, the math advantage of the three-point shot only matters in the large sample. In the small sample, it only matters if the shot goes in, and it's a lower percentage shot than shots that are closer to the basket. So, like, I tweeted this during the game while it was happening, but, like, I thought Boston was going to win that game because I thought Tatum's mid-range pull-ups over Garland were higher percentage shots than anything that Cleveland was getting, and they were. Donovan Mitchell just made 2 really tough pull-up threes, and Tatum missed a couple of layups on one play where Darius Garland did a really good job rushing Tatum, driving into traffic, over-penetrating and missing. And then another where Tatum made a great play and beat Garland and was right there. He makes that layup. It's a different game. You know, and he drove by Garland and once again got a wide open 3 for Al Horford in the left corner. There was a double team that led to another wide open 3 for Al Horford in the right corner. So, like, again, I'll pull it up real quick just because I'm curious, but technically on a percentage basis, Al Horford's shot has a higher percentage chance of going in. I'm going to pull it up just to see, but I bet you he's over 40% on let's see. This is really entertaining stuff here on YouTube, isn't it? Al Horford on uncontested catch and shoot jump shots, shooting 47.5%, 28 for 59. Like, technically, Boston got better shots, even on a point per shot basis down the stretch of that game. It's just, again, it went in. Shout out to Cleveland. That's why you play 7-game series in the NBA, because we want to find out who the better teams are absence of some of the variance that can happen in basketball games, right? So again, like that's why I was harping on that, because there's a huge difference between I'm operating in a ball screen and I'm taking like a rear view contested 17-foot pull-up jump shot off the dribble, which is a pretty low percentage and pretty low value shot, versus Tatum, 6'10", big and strong, versus Garland, tiny guard, fighting him down to like 7-8 feet from the rim and taking straight up and down short range jump shots that I think he's going to make 55 to 60% of the time, which means if we have 3 big clutch possessions at the end of the game, I feel like there's a pretty good chance that I might score on 2 of them. Whereas if I'm James Harden and I'm taking step back threes, yeah, you shot 38% on step back threes for a season, and that's worth a lot of points in a large sample, but like 62% of the time he's missing that shot. And a lot of times in the playoffs, he'd go through extended stretches where he couldn't make them, and it just didn't matter. So again, like that's kind of hopefully just a better breakdown for you guys of why I kind of believe in that process over the course of the tail ends of games. Like large sample, shot value. Small sample, field goal percentage. And like I had someone say, last thing and then we'll get out of here. I had someone say once like, well, that doesn't even factor in free throw shooting, so that doesn't work. You're right. There's a stat that Synergy uses that I really like. It's called score percentage, which just takes the percentage of possessions that you score. Meaning like made field goal or get to the line and make at least one free throw. So like the score percentage is higher when the field goal percentage is higher. The points per possession is higher when the shot value is better, right? And so again, when we get into these like slow down situations at the end of games, I'm looking for the most valuable shot on, or the most likely shot on that possession to earn me points, not the most valuable shot that I could get on that possession, if that makes sense. All right, guys, that's all I have for today and for this week. As always, I sincerely appreciate you guys for rocking with me and supporting the show. We'll be back on Monday with another set of power rankings as we bounce all the way around the league. I'll see you guys then.